He looked me in the eye and said, "You need to leave. We don't want you or your baby here." That was the last thing Jane heard from the man she thought would love her forever. She was 5 months pregnant, homeless, in pain, and carrying a tumor in her head that could kill her any day. But this story, it's not just about tragedy. It's about a woman the world tried to erase, and how she chose to survive anyway. If you've ever felt invisible, left behind, or judged by how you look, this story is for you. Subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. And comment below, have you ever seen someone judged unfairly and said nothing? Your voice might be the one someone needs to hear today. She was born under the light of an oil lamp in a small hut with mud walls and a straw roof. Jane was her name, and for the first few years of her life, she had no idea she was different. To her, life was a rhythm of early morning rooster crows, warm porridge with cassava, the rustling of banana leaves, and the sound of her mother's soft lullabies at night. In her village, where the roads were dirt and the market was just a row of rickety stalls beneath faded tarps, Jane was one of many children. She was small, a bit quieter than most, with curly hair that coiled like tight springs, and bright eyes that always seemed to be searching the sky. Her mother used to say, "Jane doesn't look at things, she looks through them." Her father laughed at that. "She's thinking too much for a 5-year-old, he'd tease. But he was proud of her. For a time they all were. Jane remembered days when she would run barefoot across the fields, chasing after her older brother Lem, who was 5 years older and full of mischief. He used to let her tag along when he went to the river to fish or climb trees for mangoes. They would return home dirty, scratched, and beaming with stories they exaggerated over dinner. At that time, no one noticed anything wrong. No one imagined her life would be any different than that of the other children who lived under the same thatched roofs, attended the same dusty school, and grew up to tend their parents' land or moved to the cities to find work. But things changed. It began with a headache. At first, Jane didn't think it was anything important. It came in short, sharp stings, like a flash of lightning behind her eyes. She would press her hands against her forehead, squint, and wait for it to pass. Sometimes it did. Other times it lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. She told her mother, who frowned and placed a cool cloth on her head. "It's just the sun," she said. "You've been playing too long. Drink water and rest." But the pain didn't stop. It came back the next day, and the day after that. Her mother started giving her herbs from the garden and massaging her temples with warm oil. Jane didn't want to complain too much. She knew her parents worked hard and didn't like to hear fussing. So she kept quiet, most of the time. One morning, while brushing Jane's hair, her mother paused. Her fingers had found something. "Hold still," she said, parting the curls with gentle hands. There, at the top left side of Jane's scalp, was a small swelling, no bigger than a plum. It wasn't there before. She showed it to her husband that night. He grunted. "Children bump their heads all the time," he said. "She's always climbing something. It'll go away." It didn't. Over the next few months, the swelling grew. It was slow, but steady. The headaches worsened. Sometimes Jane would wake up in the middle of the night crying silently into her mat, biting her lip so as not to wake her brother who slept nearby. She would feel the pounding behind her eyes, like drums, and press her fingers to the lump that had become harder, more pronounced. Her mother started keeping her home from school. Jane didn't mind at first. School had stopped being fun. The other children had started whispering. One boy pointed and said she had 2 heads. Another called her a witch girl. A teacher once stared too long at her forehead and asked no questions, but later called Jane's mother aside. After that, Jane never went back. When her hair began to thin around the swelling, Jane started wearing a scarf, her mother's old green one, with faded flowers stitched along the edge. It became her shield. She tied it tightly, always, even when sleeping. But nothing stopped the growing. Her mother became desperate. They visited the local clinic, a 3-hour walk through dust and uneven ground. The nurse there was kind, but visibly confused. They were given painkillers and told to come back if it got worse. It did. One day, a traveling group of health workers visited the village. They came with posters, a megaphone, and plastic boxes full of supplies. The whole village gathered under the shade of the large baobab tree near the church. Jane's mother stood in line with her daughter for hours. When it was finally their turn, the doctor, a young man with tired eyes, examined Jane quickly and stepped back. She needs imaging. Scans, probably surgery, he said quietly to her mother, but we can't do that here. Take her to the city. You'll find hospitals there. The city. It might as well have been the moon. They'd never left their village. They had no savings, no relatives in the city, no understanding of what surgery truly meant. Her mother asked how much it would cost. The doctor didn't know. They walked home that evening in silence. Jane watched the setting sun paint long shadows over the fields. Her mother didn't cry, but Jane could see the tightness in her jaw, the way her eyes blinked too often. At home, Jane heard them talking late into the night. Her father wanted to forget about the trip. We can't chase miracles, he said. She'll be fine. Her mother was quiet, but Jane noticed she started selling more vegetables, staying out later in the fields, counting coins more carefully. It was around that time Jane began saving money of her own. Secretly, quietly. She took odd jobs where she could, sweeping for the neighbor, selling charcoal, gathering firewood for an elderly woman who lived near the edge of the village. Every coin she made, she hid beneath a loose floorboard under her mat. She didn't know how much she needed, but she knew she'd need more than anyone was willing to give. And so, as her world grew smaller, her outings limited, her friends gone, her dreams deferred, Jane's resolve grew stronger. She would save enough. One day she would go to the city. The seasons passed. The swelling on Jane's head continued to grow, not rapidly, but steadily enough that no one could deny it anymore. Her scarf became part of her identity. If ever she was seen without it, villagers averted their eyes or made the sign of the cross. Children whispered. One boy, barely older than her, yelled across the path, "Zombie!" before laughing and running away. She never forgot that word. Her mother tried to protect her, but words have a way of sneaking through walls and windows. Jane learned to carry herself low, eyes down, mouth closed, steps careful. The world was quieter when she made herself smaller. There were good days, too. Her brother Lem, though he had grown more distant, would still bring her sweets when he came back from market. Once he brought her a paper butterfly, blue and silver, something he'd found dropped by a trader from the city. She pinned it to the wall beside her sleeping mat and stared at it often, imagining herself flying far from everything. But Lem left one morning without much warning. He had found work in a mining town far away. Jane heard her parents arguing about it. Her father said they needed the money. Her mother said he should have at least waited until Jane got better. But no one really believed she would. After Lem left, the house grew quieter. Jane kept saving, though. By the time she turned 20, she had a rusted tin box under the floorboards filled with folded bills and shiny coins. Not much, but it was more than she had ever held in her life. And when she showed it to her mother, her hands trembling, heart pounding, her mother didn't scold her. Instead, she cried. "You've been doing this alone?" she asked. Jane nodded. Her mother added a small bundle of her own, worn notes folded in a handkerchief. "Your father doesn't need to know," she said softly. "He's given up, but I haven't." Together, they counted what they had. It wasn't enough for surgery, not even close, but maybe enough to get to the city, get a consultation, a diagnosis, something beyond painkillers and silence. The hardest part was saying goodbye. They couldn't afford to go together. Transport alone was expensive, so Jane packed her tin box, a change of clothes, the butterfly, and the scarf. Her mother made her a satchel of food and pressed something into her hand, a small silver cross on a chain. "I know you don't like these things," she whispered, "but it was mine when I was your age. Let it remind you that you're loved." Jane nodded. She had stopped praying years ago, but she kept the cross anyway. The bus was late and loud. The journey took hours, through dry fields, past goats and donkeys, through checkpoints where men with guns asked for bribes. Jane sat in the corner, clutching her bag tightly, trying to ignore the sideways glances. The city was overwhelming. Tall buildings loomed like silent watchers. The streets were choked with people, cars, shouts, smoke. No one looked at her directly, which was both a relief and a new kind of invisibility. In the village, she had been stared at. Here she was ignored. She stayed in a cheap guest house, one recommended by a stranger on the bus. It smelled of mold and kerosene, but it had a bed and a door that locked. Jane had never slept in a room by herself before. That night she lay awake listening to distant sirens and barking dogs. The next morning, she found her way to the hospital. It was massive, more like a city than a building. Corridors stretched endlessly. Nurses rushed past. Patients sat slumped on benches, waiting with eyes like hers, tired, uncertain, afraid. At the registration desk, she handed over her small stash of bills. The woman counted silently, then nodded. "You'll need a CT scan," she said. "That will be $10. We'll schedule it now." Jane released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She paid. She waited. Hours passed. At last she was called into a cold room with buzzing lights. The machine looked like something from another world. She lay still while it clicked and hummed and spun. "You can go now," a technician said. "Come back in 2 weeks for results." Jane returned to the guest house, exhausted but strangely hopeful. She had done it. She had taken a step. But hope is a fragile thing. When she returned to the hospital 2 weeks later, after stretching her remaining coins for food and rent, the records office told her something had gone wrong. "We can't find your file," the clerk said flatly. "There was a mix-up. Maybe someone misplaced it." Jane stared at her. "What do I do?" The woman shrugged. "You can reschedule, pay again." She left the building in a daze. Outside, the sky was bright and indifferent. She sat on the steps for a long time, her scarf slipping slightly, her heart cracking open. People walked past her. No one stopped. Later that day, she wandered the streets without knowing where she was going. Her feet hurt. Her stomach ached, her head throbbed. When she finally collapsed on a corner near a roadside stall, someone crouched beside her. "You need food," the woman said. Her name was Marla. She sold porridge and fried plantains from a cart. Without asking, she gave Jane a bowl and told her to sit. They didn't talk much that day. But when Marla found out Jane had nowhere to stay, she gave her directions to a safer guest house nearby. "Tell them I sent you. They won't charge full price." Jane thanked her. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry. That night, in the new guest house, she opened her satchel. The butterfly was still there. Bent now, one wing folded in. She smoothed it carefully and placed it beside her mat. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow she would find another way. The road home felt longer than it had on the way to the city. Maybe because Jane carried more than just her satchel now. She carried the weight of knowing that even when you did everything right, when you fought, saved, traveled, endured, life could still leave you empty-handed. Her mother was waiting at the edge of the village when the bus pulled in. Dust curled around the tires, and a few chickens scattered from the roadside. Jane stepped off slowly, holding her bag close. Her mother's face lit up for a second, then dimmed as she saw Jane's expression. "They lost it," Jane said simply. Her mother didn't ask what it was. She didn't need to. That evening, they sat on overturned buckets behind the house, beneath the guava tree that no longer bore fruit. Jane told her everything. The scan, the waiting, the mistake, the clerk's shrug, the hospital's silence. Her mother listened quietly, face turned to the darkening sky. "I'm sorry," she whispered at last. "I thought they would help you there." Jane didn't respond. She didn't blame her mother, not really, but there was a dull ache in her chest now, deeper than the one in her head. It was the ache of something dying slowly inside, a small spark maybe, that she had clung to without realizing it. Hope. They resumed life as it had been before. Days were filled with chores, silence, and the careful budgeting of everything, from coins to cooking oil. Jane still wore the green scarf, but now it felt heavier, like a bandage wrapped around a wound that would never heal. The village hadn't changed, but Jane had. She noticed things more now, the way the health post was open only 2 days a week, the way medicine always seemed to run out by mid-morning, the way pregnant women walked miles to get prenatal care, only to be told to come back next month. She saw the lines outside the clinic growing longer, but the staff inside growing fewer. One afternoon she passed by the clinic and heard a man shouting inside, "My wife is bleeding! I've been here since dawn!" A nurse tried to calm him, explaining that the doctor was away for a funeral and no one else could do the procedure. Jane didn't stay to hear the rest. She knew how the story ended. That night, as she lay on her mat, she thought about all the other Janes in the village, girls who might feel a headache for weeks, then months, and be told it was just the heat, just growing pains, just something they'd get over. What if someone had told her back then what the swelling could mean? What if the health workers had taught her mother the signs? What if they had a system, a way to act early, before small things became lifelong scars? But what if was useless now? Her father remained distant. He spoke less and less at meals. When Jane entered the room, he often left. She didn't know if it was shame or denial, or both. Once she overheard him telling a neighbor, "She's old enough now. Let her handle her own problems." Her mother still tried, but even she seemed tired in new ways. She moved slower. Her eyes avoided Jane's face longer than before. Jane began spending more time outside the house, not far, just by the edge of the field, or near the old well, where no one came anymore. She'd bring a book, though she rarely read it. Mostly she sat, listening. Sometimes Lena came, the girl who had once been her best friend, now taller, a little shy, but still kind. They didn't talk about the past, or the scarf, or the city. They talked about the weather, about which chickens were laying and how the river was lower this year. But one day Lena asked softly, "Will you try again? Go back to the city?" Jane looked at her. "With what money?" Lena hesitated. "You could ask Lem." Jane laughed, short, bitter. "Lem hasn't written in over a year. But he's family." Jane shook her head. "That doesn't mean what it used to." There was a long pause, and then Lena said something Jane would remember for a long time. "You know, I think the worst part is not when people laugh or whisper. It's when they pretend you don't exist at all." Jane didn't reply. She didn't need to. The truth hung in the air between them, sharp and invisible. As the weeks passed, Jane began to hear new rumors. People said she'd been cursed, that she was a sign of bad luck, that she had brought disease back from the city. A few even claimed they'd seen her walking at night, barefoot, eyes glowing. She ignored them, or tried to. But one evening, when she passed a group of teenage boys near the village center, one of them threw a stone at her back and laughed. "Monster," he called. Jane didn't flinch. She kept walking. But when she got home, she went straight to her mat, pulled the scarf tighter, and stayed there until morning. Her mother never asked why she didn't eat that night. The following weeks passed like drifting ash, silent, slow, gray. Jane moved through them without thinking too much. She had stopped counting days or hoping for changes. She simply existed, woke up, helped her mother with chores, fetched water, fed the chickens, listened to the sounds of other people's lives from a distance. One morning, she stood in line at the village clinic to get paracetamol for her mother's joint pain. The sun was already harsh by mid-morning, and the queue was long, winding past the rickety bamboo fence that barely held the roof together. Flies hovered in clusters, and a baby cried somewhere up ahead. Behind Jane, two women whispered. Their voices were low, but not enough to be unheard. "She's still alive? Can't believe her parents kept her. If that were mine." Jane didn't turn. She had grown too used to being a conversation, not a person. After nearly 2 hours, she reached the counter, only to be told the painkillers were out of stock. The nurse handed her a scribbled note. "You can try the shop at the main road," she said. "But they charge." Jane stared at the note. "I don't have money." The nurse shrugged. "Next delivery is in 2 weeks, maybe 3. As Jane walked home, her feet coated in red dust, she passed by the old community hall. A group of young volunteers stood there, setting up a plastic tent. A banner fluttered in the wind, though it was faded and frayed. It read, "Health Awareness Week. Early action saves lives." She paused. One of the volunteers handed her a leaflet. She looked no older than 18, bright-eyed and hopeful. Jane took the paper. The print was smudged, but she read the words slowly. "Signs of serious illness you shouldn't ignore. Chronic pain, swelling, loss of appetite, sudden weight change, persistent fatigue." She read that list twice. Somewhere near the bottom was a sentence in bold. "If you notice something unusual, don't wait. See a doctor immediately." Jane laughed softly. It was the kind of laugh that had no humor in it. She looked up at the girl who had given her the paper. "And if there is no doctor?" The girl blinked, unsure how to answer. Jane didn't wait for one. She walked away, the leaflet crushed in her palm. That night, as she lay in bed listening to her mother's shallow breathing and the faraway call of hyenas, Jane thought about how many people in her village had died not because their diseases were unbeatable, but because they never knew what they had. Or worse, knew too late. There was the boy with the limp who had died in his sleep. The old woman who lost her sight over a year because no one told her cataracts could be treated. The child who bled from the nose for days and was told it was the ancestors, not anemia. She thought of the women who labored at home, without midwives, and never woke again. And of herself, too. She had been in pain for years. Everyone saw it. No one acted, not even her, for a long time. She stared at the ceiling, where a line of termites had chewed through the bamboo, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to wonder if maybe she wasn't cursed. Maybe she wasn't being punished. Maybe she was just forgotten. Like so many others, the next morning she took the leaflet and walked to Marla's stall by the roadside. The woman greeted her with a warm smile. "You look like you've seen ghosts." "I've lived with them long enough," Jane replied. Marla raised an eyebrow. "You hungry?" Jane shook her head. "No. I need to ask you something." Marla leaned on her elbows. "Shoot. Do you know anyone, any doctor, not at the clinic?" Marla thought for a long moment. "There's an old man, retired, lives near the old mango grove. People say he used to be a real doctor back in the capital. Now he just lives quietly, doesn't take patients. Doesn't talk much." Jane hesitated. "But he might know. He might. Do you think he'd see me?" Marla looked at her. Really looked. "You're not like most people around here. You don't complain. You don't gossip. You don't even beg." Jane said nothing. Marla smiled. "I'll talk to him. No promises, but come back tomorrow." Jane nodded. "Thank you." As she walked home, something inside her stirred. Not quite hope. Not yet. But something close. The path to the old mango grove was overgrown, half forgotten. Weeds curled over the dirt trail, and thorny bushes scratched at Jane's ankles as she walked. The sun was low, casting golden beams through the trees, lighting up the dust that floated around her feet. Her scarf clung tightly around her head, as always. She gripped the paper Marla had given her, a note scribbled with shaky handwriting and the name of a man she'd never met. Dr. Egan. The name didn't sound like anyone from her village. It didn't even sound like the name she was used to. Maybe he was from the north, or the coast, or even beyond the borders. She didn't know. All she knew was that Marla believed he might listen. And that was more than anyone else had done lately. At the end of the path, half hidden by trees, stood a small house made of concrete and red tin sheets. It looked cleaner than most buildings in the area, with curtains in the windows and rows of herbs growing in buckets out front. Jane hesitated at the gate. Her heart was thudding in her chest, and not from the walk. What if he refused to see her? What if he took one look at her and closed the door? She had felt that rejection too many times. She stepped forward. The gate creaked. A dog barked once but didn't charge. She heard the soft shuffling of feet inside, then the door opened. He was older than she expected. Thin, with skin the color of roasted coffee and a trimmed white beard. His eyes were sharp, curious, not cruel, not surprised. Just observant. "Yes?" Jane swallowed. "I'm Jane. Marla sent me." She said, "You used to be a doctor." "I still am," he said quietly. "Just no longer in service. She faltered. "I need someone to look at me. I can't pay much. Maybe nothing." He looked at her for a long time. Not at her scarf, not at the faint outline beneath it. At her. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The room smelled of dried herbs and old books. Shelves lined the walls, filled with worn medical volumes, glass jars, and faded photographs. A stethoscope hung from a hook near the doorway, beside a white coat that hadn't been worn in a long time. Jane sat on a wooden stool. Her hands trembled slightly. Dr. Egan didn't rush. He moved like someone used to waiting. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink, then we'll talk." She drank. Then slowly she unwrapped her scarf. She hadn't done that in front of a stranger in years. The light from the window touched her scalp gently, revealing the bulge, uneven, pronounced, stretching from above her left eyebrow to the top of her head. The skin around it was pale and tight. Her hair no longer grew on that side. Dr. Egan said nothing for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, adjusted a small lamp, and began examining her with careful, respectful hands. "Does it hurt?" "All the time. Worse at night." "Yes." "Dizziness, nausea, vision changes?" "Sometimes." He nodded, stepped back, looked into her eyes, not just medically but deeply. "Did anyone ever tell you what this might be?" Jane shook her head. "They said tumor, but no one was sure. The hospital in the city lost my scan." Dr. Egan's mouth tightened. "Typical." Jane looked at him. "You worked in the city?" "For 30 years. General Hospital. Then policy changed, funding dried up and, well, they decided my position was no longer necessary." "Why?" "Because I asked too many questions." He moved to a shelf, pulled down a book, opened it, and pointed to an image. This is close to what you have. It could be a meningioma, or possibly a long-term post-traumatic calcification. But without imaging, it's difficult to say." Jane blinked. "Post-traumatic?" He nodded. "It means the swelling may not have started on its own. It could be a result of an injury, something that happened when you were very young. A fall, a blow to the head, something that was ignored or forgotten. She froze. Her mind reached back, sifting through broken memories. She had no clear recollection of falling, but there was something. A scar near her left ear. A story her mother once told about how she had tumbled off the back of a donkey when she was 2. They had never gone to the clinic. She hadn't even cried, they said. Just slept a lot that night. Can something from that long ago grow like this? Dr. Egan closed the book. If the initial trauma caused slow bleeding or triggered abnormal tissue growth, yes. Especially if it was untreated. Jane stared at the floor. Her breath felt thin. All this time. It might have been that one fall. It's possible, he said gently. But we'd need new scans to know for sure. I can't afford that. He nodded slowly. I know. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, birds called from the trees. The wind rattled the tin roof. Jane felt her world shifting, not collapsing but bending, rewriting itself. Dr. Egan poured more water. You know, he said after a while, in the city I saw many cases like yours. People came too late, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know, or because the system failed them. Jane looked up. Do you think I was failed? He met her gaze. I think you were forgotten. She nodded. The words didn't sting. They rang true. Can you help me? She asked. Not alone, he said, but maybe I can help you find someone who can. The walk home from Dr. Egan's felt different. The trees along the path didn't sway the same way. The dust clung tighter to her shoes. Even the sky looked flatter, duller. Jane wasn't sure if the world had changed or if something inside her had simply cracked open, letting light into a place she'd long kept closed. One fall, that's what he had said. One fall, maybe when she was 2, that's all it might have taken to alter the course of her life. She thought of all the years she had lived with the idea that her body had turned against her, that some cruel twist of nature had chosen her randomly, unfairly. But now the possibility sat like a stone in her chest, that it wasn't nature or chance, but a moment of carelessness, a hidden truth. She reached home just before sunset. The chickens were already roosting and smoke curled from the kitchen. Her mother was crouched near the fire, stirring a pot with one hand and waving away the smoke with the other. Jane stood at the edge of the yard watching her. Mama, her mother turned, her face brightened, just for a moment. You're back. Did he see you? Jane nodded slowly. Yes. He saw me. Her mother smiled in relief, wiping her hands on her apron. And, what did he say? Jane stepped closer. He said it might not be a tumor. It might be something else, something from a long time ago. Her mother's hands stilled. Jane took a breath. He said, it could be from an injury. From when I was very young. Maybe from a fall. Silence fell between them. The fire crackled. A breeze moved through the banana leaves. Jane's voice softened. Mama, did I ever fall when I was little? Did something happen that you didn't tell me about? Her mother didn't answer at first. She reached for the pot and stirred it once, twice, though the food was already done. Her shoulders hunched slightly, as if shielding herself from something invisible. Jane waited. Finally, her mother sat back on her heels, exhaling long and slow. You were 2, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You were riding on your father's back, on the donkey. He let you sit up front, like always. But the donkey was spooked by something. A snake, maybe. It bucked. You fell. Jane swallowed. No one ever told me. Her mother nodded. We didn't think it was serious. You cried a little, but then you stopped. You slept through the night. We thought it was fine. You didn't take me to the clinic? There was no clinic that week. The nurse was gone, and we were scared. Scared the village would blame us, that people would say we were careless, that we let our baby get hurt. Jane sat down slowly on the stone beside the fire. Her hands trembled. All this time, she whispered, all these years, I thought it was something I was born with, or something that just happened. Her mother wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I've lived with that fear every day. Every time I looked at you, I wondered. But I didn't want to believe it was our fault. Jane said nothing. There was no anger in her. Only an overwhelming weight. Of grief, of clarity, of a truth too long buried. After a long silence, her mother said, I didn't know it would grow. I didn't know it would become what it is. I thought, maybe if we prayed it would go away. Jane looked at her mother, really looked. She saw the lines on her face, the weariness in her eyes. the hands that had worked every day, for decades to keep this family alive. And for the first time she saw the guilt, too, heavy and unspoken. "I'm not angry," Jane said quietly, "but I needed to know." Her mother reached out, touching her hand. "Now you do." That night Jane lay awake on her mat, staring at the ceiling. The truth didn't bring comfort, but it brought something else, understanding, a sense of shape to the pain she had carried all her life. It wasn't just random suffering, it had a beginning, a cause, and maybe, just maybe, that meant it could have an end too. She turned over and watched the sleeping form of her mother across the room. Then, without thinking, she reached up and pulled off the scarf from her head. The air touched her skin, cool and unfamiliar. She let it stay off. For the first time in years, the first time Jane saw Daniel, he was fixing the roof of the old storage hut near the marketplace. She had gone to buy soap, her scarf tied loosely that morning, not as tightly wrapped as usual. The day was hot, too hot to care how much of her head was exposed. She was tired, and her body ached from digging weeds in the garden. He was standing on the roof with a hammer, sleeves rolled up, laughing at something one of the boys said below. His voice was rich and easy, like he belonged to the place, though Jane knew she hadn't seen him before. He moved like someone who knew what he was doing, steady, capable. Their eyes met only briefly. She looked away quickly, as always, but he didn't. He kept looking, and then to her surprise he nodded, not a smirk, not a whisper to his friend, just a quiet human nod. It had been so long since someone acknowledged her like that. Later that day, she saw him again, at Marla's food stall. He ordered 2 plates and paid without haggling, which made Marla raise an eyebrow. He saw Jane waiting nearby and gestured toward the bench beside him. "You can sit," he said. "I don't bite." Jane hesitated. She had heard these kinds of invitations before, mocking, cruel, designed to pull her into a joke she didn't understand until it was too late. But his eyes were steady, not soft, not sad, just real. She sat. They didn't speak much that first time. He ate, she sipped water. But when he finished, he said, "You're quieter than most," Jane replied without thinking. "I'm used to being ignored." He paused, then said, "Maybe they ignore you because they're not brave enough to see you." That night, Jane lay awake for a long time. In the following days, she saw him often. Daniel had come from another village farther west looking for work. He fixed fences, patched walls, and even repaired a broken well that had leaked for years. People liked him. He worked hard, smiled easily, and never acted like he was better than anyone else. He started walking with Jane after market days, never asking too many questions, just talking about trees and weather, and the strange way chickens always cross the road at the worst times. And slowly, Jane found herself speaking more, laughing even. The villagers noticed. Some raised eyebrows, others whispered. A few confronted her mother directly. "You'll let her talk to a man like that, in her condition?" But her mother, for once, didn't flinch. "She's allowed to be happy," she said, "even if only for a while." One afternoon Daniel brought Jane a gift. It wasn't anything expensive, just a hair comb made of polished wood, carved with a bird at the handle. "I saw it at the roadside stall," he said. "Thought of you." Jane touched it with shaking fingers. "No one's ever given me something like this." "That's their mistake," he said simply. Days became weeks. Their walks grew longer. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel reached for her hand. She let him take it. It was the first time in her life someone touched her without flinching. Soon after, he asked if she would consider living with him. He had built a small hut on a plot of land just beyond the village. It wasn't much: mud walls, a metal roof, and a garden with 3 rows of cassava. But it was his. Jane didn't answer right away. That night she told her mother. Her mother sat silent for a while, then said, "You've been alone for so long. If someone wants to walk with you now, even for a short road, maybe you should let them." Jane packed her few belongings the next morning. The scarf, the wooden comb, the butterfly. She kissed her mother's forehead and walked toward something that looked a little like hope. Living with Daniel was strange at first. She wasn't used to sharing space, or being asked what she wanted to eat, or being told you look nice today, even when she felt like nothing did. He never once asked her to take off the scarf. He never once stared. And when, one night, she finally pulled it off herself, turned her head so he could see all of her, he only nodded. "Still you," he said. Jane wept then, quietly. Not because of what he said, but because for the first time she believed it. Weeks passed. They planted tomatoes, shared meals, laughed about the fat chicken that kept stealing mango peels. And then, one afternoon, she felt a shift inside her body. It started with nausea, then dizziness, then a sense of knowing. She was pregnant. She told Daniel gently, unsure of how he would react. He looked at her for a long time, then stood up and left the hut without a word. Jane waited for hours. When he returned, he was drunk, his words slurred. He looked at her differently. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "You should have been more careful." Jane's heart pounded. "It's not a punishment. It's a child. Our child." He laughed, cold, bitter. "You think anyone wants a child from you?" She stepped back. He didn't hit her, but his silence after that spoke louder than any blow. Days passed without conversation. He slept outside some nights. Others he didn't come back at all. Then one evening, he returned with another woman, younger, lighter-skinned, hair done in tight braids. She looked Jane up and down, said nothing, and walked straight into the hut. Daniel didn't even look at Jane. "You need to go," he said. Jane felt her stomach twist. "I have nowhere else," she whispered. "That's not my problem anymore." She left with a mat, a bowl, and the scarf folded at the bottom of her bag. The moon was high that night, and the path was cold. But Jane walked, alone again. Except this time she wasn't. She had another heartbeat inside her now, and she would protect it, even if no one had ever protected her. The days that followed blurred together. Jane wandered from one dusty path to another, searching for somewhere she could rest. Each morning her body felt heavier, the child inside her moving more often now, as if reminding her that time was running short. She had no plan, no money, and no one left to turn to. The few villagers who had once pitied her now looked away when she passed. No one offered food, no one asked questions. They saw her belly, her scarf, her silence, and pretended she wasn't there. At night she curled up beneath the old trees near the edge of the market, using her scarf as a blanket, listening to the wind rustle through dry leaves and trying to ignore the ache in her back. Hunger gnawed at her, slow and patient. She begged, but only when she had to. Marla gave her leftover food when she could, slipping her small bags of rice and beans without making a scene. It wasn't enough, but it kept her alive. Eventually, Jane found an abandoned shack near the river, half collapsed, with holes in the roof and vines curling through the windows. The landlord was an old man who had gone half blind. When Jane asked about the place, he squinted at her, then waved his hand. 10 coins a month, if you don't complain about the rats." She didn't. The shack became her home. She swept it, patched the roof with cloth, and used old boxes to make a bed. She kept a tin cup by the door to collect rainwater, and built a small fire pit just outside. It wasn't safe, but it was hers. As her belly grew, so did her fear. There was no midwife, no clinic she trusted, no money for help. Sometimes she felt dizzy for hours. Other times the baby kicked so hard she doubled over in pain. She began talking to the child, soft words in the dark, promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "I don't know who you'll be," she whispered one night, curled on her side. "But I will be better for you than the world was for me." When the time came, it came without warning. The pain started at dawn, sharp, deep, unlike anything she had ever felt. She tried to walk, to find help, but her legs gave out. She crawled back into the shack, clutching her stomach, her breath coming in gasps. Alone, she labored. There were no hands to hold hers, no water to soothe her lips, no voices guiding her through. Only the wind, the cracking walls, and the life inside her fighting to be born. Hours passed. Then, just as the sun reached its peak, the cries came. The sound was weak, then stronger. Jane held her child in shaking arms, wrapped in the last clean cloth she had. A girl, tiny, red-faced, alive. She wept, not from pain but from something deeper. Relief, awe, terror. Love. She named her Hope. That night, Jane watched her daughter sleep on the mat beside her. The baby's breaths were soft, her hands curled into fists no bigger than seeds. She looked so small, so breakable. Jane didn't sleep. Her body hurt, but her mind was clear. Everything was different now. The hunger was worse. Milk didn't come easily. The baby cried often, and Jane walked for hours each day trying to find food, roots, scraps, anything. Sometimes Marla helped, sometimes strangers did. Mostly it was just Jane and Hope clinging to each other. Once she passed Daniel in the village. He didn't look at her. She didn't stop. Another time she saw his new partner at the well, laughing with friends. Jane adjusted the sling on her shoulder and walked away. People still whispered, still called her names: monster, cursed, zombie. But now Jane didn't flinch, because when Hope cried, Jane was there. When Hope smiled, her first smile, toothless and pure, Jane felt something crack open again inside her. Not grief this time, strength, and for the first time she believed it. Maybe she had been broken, but she was not gone. The pain returned slowly, like a tide creeping in after years of quiet. At first it was only at night, dull, pressing, manageable. Jane would cradle Hope, rock her back and forth, and tell herself it was just exhaustion, that her body needed rest, that it would pass. But it didn't. It got worse. The pressure in her skull built steadily, wrapping around the sides of her head, like a vice. Some mornings she woke with blurred vision. Other days, she couldn't keep food down. The light hurt, her hands shook. Hope cried more often now, perhaps sensing her mother's distress. Jane tried to hide it, to stay strong, but every step felt heavier than the last. She didn't tell anyone. Who would listen? The village still looked at her the same way, as if she carried sickness in her skin, as if what she had might rub off if they stood too close. Even Marla, though still kind, had become more distant. Her own daughter had fallen ill with a fever, and though she never said it outright, Jane felt the space widening between them. The food offerings stopped, the warm greetings faded, so Jane said nothing, until one morning, when she fainted. She had just returned from fetching water, Hope strapped to her back. Her legs gave out on the threshold of the shack, and she collapsed, nearly falling on the child. Hope cried out, terrified. Jane woke hours later on the cold floor, the tin cup spilled beside her. Her head throbbed violently, and her shirt was damp with sweat. That evening she walked. It took nearly an hour to reach the grove where Dr. Egan lived. The trees cast long shadows, and the wind rustled low through the branches. She hadn't seen him in weeks, not since the birth. She didn't even know if he still lived there, but her feet moved anyway, one step at a time. When she reached the small house, her vision blurred again. The porch spun slightly. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again, weaker this time. The door opened. He looked thinner than before, but his eyes were still the same, sharp, watchful. When he saw her, he didn't ask questions. He stepped aside. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He helped her to a chair, took Hope gently from her back, and set her down on a folded blanket. Then he turned to Jane. "Tell me," he said. She did. The dizziness, the headaches, the nausea, the collapse. He examined her slowly, carefully, checked her pupils, her reflexes, her pulse. Then he sat back, folded his hands. "It's progressing," he said quietly. "Whatever it is, tumor, calcification, pressure from old trauma, it's growing." Jane nodded. She had expected that. Still, the confirmation felt like someone closing a door behind her. "Is there anything?" "There might be," he said, "but not here, not in this village." She looked at him. "There's a specialist," he continued, "in the city. A clinic that does outreach work, sometimes takes difficult cases without full payment. I used to refer patients there. I still know someone." Jane's heart pounded. "Would they see me?" He hesitated. "I don't know. But if anyone would, it's them." Hope made a soft sound from the blanket, a tiny whimper. Jane turned to look at her daughter. "I don't have money," she said. "I didn't say it would cost money. But it will cost something." "What?" "Courage, travel, trust." Jane stared at her hands. Her nails were dirty, her skin rough, her body tired. But Hope was still breathing, still watching her with eyes too wide for someone so small. "Write to them," she said. "Please, try." Dr. Egan nodded. For the first time in weeks, Jane felt the faint flicker of something she thought had died. Not hope, but its shadow. 3 weeks passed. Jane waited. Each morning she walked to the post stand by the village center, though letters rarely came to people like her. She would stand there with Hope in her arms, nod to the man who handled the mail, and ask, "Anything for Egan?" Usually the answer was no, but then one afternoon, the man didn't shake his head. He pulled out a slim envelope marked with a city hospital seal and handed it to her. Her fingers trembled as she took it. She ran, back to the grove, to the house with the red tin roof and the man who once wore a white coat. Doctor. Egan opened the envelope carefully, unfolded the letter inside, and read silently. Then he looked up. They've agreed to see you. Jane blinked. Really? They reviewed the notes I sent, your symptoms, your history. They're not promising miracles, but they said to bring you in. There's a neurosurgeon on rotation, someone with experience in cases like yours. Jane stared at him. When? They said the window is tight. 2 weeks from today. You'll have to travel soon. Her chest tightened. How? I have nothing, I know, he said. But we'll figure it out. And somehow they did. Word spread through the village. Though no one said it aloud, many people had watched Jane suffer for years. They had ignored her, yes, but guilt lingers in strange ways. One family donated a bag of cassava to sell. A man with a motorbike offered to take her halfway. Marla returned with a jar of coins, silent, eyes glassy. Even Daniel's name was whispered once. He had left the village weeks ago, vanished with the other woman. Good. Jane packed only what she needed. The scarf. Hope's second blanket. A small pouch of salt. She kissed her mother goodbye, an embrace longer than usual, filled with unspoken prayers. The city rose before her like a wound and a promise. She remembered it faintly from her last trip, the chaos, the horns, the metal and glass and cement pressing in on all sides. But this time, it was different. She wasn't a girl chasing a scan. She was a mother fighting for time. Dr. Egan had arranged for them to stay near the clinic, in a shelter for women receiving treatment. It smelled of antiseptic and boiled cabbage. Hope cried the first 2 nights, unused to the noise, but slowly adjusted. The day of the evaluation arrived. Jane sat in a cold examination room while nurses moved around her, efficient but kind. Hope lay on her chest, sleeping, as the machines buzzed and scanned and beeped. Then the doctor came in. A young woman. Sharp-eyed, serious, but with a voice that didn't frighten Jane. She explained the results slowly, clearly. You have a benign growth, she said, likely from an old trauma. It's pressing against parts of your brain that control vision, balance, and motor function. That's why your symptoms are worsening. Jane nodded. Can it be removed? Yes, the doctor said, but it's complicated. You'll need full surgery, a team, post-op care. It's not something we rush. Jane looked down at Hope. Is it possible? The doctor paused. Then softly, it is. But then came the rest. They couldn't cover the full cost. They had programs, yes, but there were limits. Partial assistance, maybe donors, maybe media outreach, maybe, so many maybes. Jane left the clinic that evening with a folder of papers and a hollow ache behind her ribs. She had come this far. And now? Now it would come down to strangers, to luck, to mercy. That night, she sat in the tiny courtyard of the shelter, Hope in her arms, the air thick with heat and diesel fumes. Dr. Egan sat beside her. He had traveled to the city a day later to check on her. I failed you once, he said. I don't want to do it again. You didn't fail me, Jane replied. You helped me remember I'm not invisible. He looked at her. There's something we can try, he said. I have a contact who works with a fundraising platform, online donations, videos, stories. It's not guaranteed, but it's real. Jane hesitated. I don't know how to ask people for help. You won't, he said. You'll tell your truth. I'll do the asking. The next day they recorded a video. Jane sat in front of a borrowed camera, her scarf tied gently back. The bump on her head was visible. Her hands shook slightly, but her eyes did not waver. My name is Jane, she said. I am 24 years old. I have a daughter, and I have something growing inside my head that is slowly taking me away from her. She told her story, not with drama, with dignity. When the video ended, there was silence in the room. Dr. Egan uploaded it that night. Within days, people responded. Some gave a few dollars. Others shared the story. A retired nurse from overseas offered to contact her hospital. A woman who had survived a similar tumor sent a message, "You're stronger than you know. I'm proof it can be done." The number grew slowly, then faster. Within 2 weeks they had enough for the surgery deposit. Jane stood in the hospital lobby, holding Hope, staring at the receipt. She had never seen that much money in her life. The surgery was scheduled. The morning it happened, the nurses took Hope from her arms gently. Jane kissed her forehead and whispered, "You saved me." Then they rolled her away. Hours passed. When Jane woke, everything was white. The ceiling, the sheets, the light. Her head hurt. but the pressure was gone, truly gone. Dr. Egan stood nearby, his face unreadable. Jane whispered, "Am I alive?" He smiled. Very much. Recovery was slow, painful, but it was life. Hope visited daily, carried by a nurse who adored her. Jane watched her daughter take her first steps in that hospital hallway, tiny, uncertain but determined, just like her mother. 3 months later, Jane returned to the village. The scar across her scalp was clean, the swelling gone. People stared, but they didn't whisper this time. They nodded, some even smiled. Marla cried when she saw her. "You came back." Jane took her hand. "I always planned to." She built a small garden near her mother's house, tomatoes, beans, flowers that bloomed in dry soil. She taught other women what to watch for, signs of illness, the importance of early checks, of speaking up, of never staying silent just because someone told you it wasn't serious. And every night, she held Hope close. "You and me," she whispered, "always. There's a kind of strength the world never sees, the strength it takes to keep going, when no one is watching." Jane didn't have money. She didn't have a voice in the community. She didn't even have a mirror that reflected kindness. But she had something else, a reason to live. And that reason had 2 little hands and called her Mama. Let her story remind us. Sometimes, survival isn't loud. It's quiet, unnoticed, brave. If this touched you, share it with someone who needs a reason to hold on. And remember, compassion is free, but it changes everything.